Yeah, so it's my pleasure to introduce Chelsea Moore. She's just wrapping up a pretty unique internship, actually, funded by a grant we received from Disney Conservation Fund and private donations. And within just a couple of weeks, she'll be starting a new position as the Education and Community Outreach Coordinator at the Buffalo Maritime Center. So Chelsea received her bachelor's and master's from SUNY Buffalo State University. Her master's research focused on spatial ecology of northern map turtles in the upper Niagara River. She was comparing movements and behaviors of resident and translocated turtles for that study. And this was really perfect background for jumping into all the work we have going on movements, behaviors of gopher tortoises here at Archbold. And during the past 9 months, she's contributed to some pilot studies of new remote tracking technology that we would like to use on hatchling and juvenile tortoises. She's probably spent at least 2 or 3 days a week manually tracking juveniles and adult tortoises in the meantime. She's become very adept at scoping burrows and capturing and measuring tortoises of all sizes so that we can get continued acquiring data on growth and survival rates in different habitats. And for her independent research, I suggested that she think about interesting research questions that could be answered using our long-term telemetry data for female tortoises. So as you'll see, she did an amazing job of compiling and manipulating a rather large data set to answer some novel questions about gopher tortoise spatial ecology. And just before I let her jump in, I just want to say what a real pleasure it's been to work with such a bright, passionate young scientist. This has been a difficult year for, in many respects, but her presence around the lab has just been a joy. So we're going to miss you, Chelsea, and we look forward to continuing this work. And I hope you'll be continuing to be part of it in some way, even from Buffalo. So I will turn it over to you at this point.
All right, can everyone hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Betsy. I'm Chelsea, and it's been an absolute pleasure working at Archbold for the last 10 months in the herpetology program. I came here with a goal to gain experience and get better working with GIS software and R, and Betsy facilitated that the entire time I was here. It's just been an honor working with you, and you're a great mentor. So thank you very much. Again, just acknowledging Disney Conservation Fund for funding my stint here as an intern, and also for parts of the project that I'll be talking about today. And one more shout out before I get started. I just wanted to shout out to Dustin Angel for taking this beautiful portrait. Dustin is the education coordinator here at Archbold, and he takes pictures and portraits of field ecologists to show students what the faces of science could look like. And so he just does a really great job. And I wanted to acknowledge him for that. And with that, I think I can get started. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Today, I'll be talking to you about seasonal space use and interannual site fidelity of female gopher tortoises here in South Central Florida. If my slides will cooperate. All right. So we study the spatial ecology of animals for a variety of reasons. It can tell us about their habitat preferences, population dynamics, energy and resource requirements. And then all of these things can help us to minimize our negative human impact and better species management. And of course, I'm talking about the spatial ecology of gopher tortoises today, or the scientific name Gopherus polyphemus. These big, beautiful, long-lived reptiles I had the honor of working with this year. They're considered ecosystem engineers and keystone species because they dig these long burrows that they use for thermal regulation. But as a result, they're quite literally building habitat for the animals that live around them. And over 300 other species have been seen using gopher tortoise burrows as habitat. And that includes some animals that rely solely on these burrows as habitat. These animals are primarily found in the sandhill and longleaf pine habitats, as well as the coastal dune and scrub, all characterized by well-drained sandy soils, open canopy, and diverse vegetation. The gopher tortoise is threatened in the state of Florida, and it's also federally protected in parts of its range. Unfortunately, they share the same habitat that humans like, high and dry, and those habitats are found far and few between in Florida, unfortunately. So when we're talking about the spatial use of an animal, we're not only talking about the physical space that it's using, but also how they're using that space through time. And turtles and tortoises are known to exhibit seasonal variation in their movements based on temperature and precipitation, but also reproductive cycles and hormone levels are also playing a role in these movements. The gopher tortoise specifically has daily movements that are focused around these burrows, and they're typically moving away from these burrows less than 30 meters a day. However, they can use several burrows throughout the year. They also have seasonal movements where females are exhibiting longer movements and larger ranges in the nesting season, and then showing shorter movements and smaller ranges during the cooler winter months here in Florida. And then another aspect of spatial ecology that I'll be talking about specifically today is this idea of site fidelity, or returning to a familiar location. And this can tell us how susceptible an animal is to landscape change, as well as detecting responses to restoration efforts. Gopherus, the genus Gopherus, so gopher tortoises and desert tortoises, have been known to reuse burrows, exhibit homing behavior, and remain within a home range in subsequent years. And this can be advantageous or disadvantageous. Some of the advantages, if you're familiar with the location, you are maybe familiar with the threats there, and so it can reduce your risk of predation. You may also maintain dominance in social interactions. And then you may also not be using energy that would otherwise be spent exploring or looking for new habitat. Site fidelity can also be disadvantageous if an animal has this strong urge or strong drive to return to their familiar location, regardless of what's going on in the landscape. And so they may not be taking advantage of new, more suitable habitat that's becoming available. And this is relevant to our study site here at Archbold Biological Station. So we're located at the southern end of the Lake Wales Ridge in Highlands County, Florida. And our study population of gopher tortoises is found on Red Hill. Red Hill is classified by 3 main land cover types. We have an area of ruderal or mowed habitat that we call hill garden. We have fire suppressed sandhill, and then we also have restored sandhill, which is the native habitat here. And this area of restored sandhill has had restoration efforts started in 2014 that include mechanical clearing and prescribed burns, trying to restore that native habitat. And although those restoration efforts have been ongoing, the tortoise density in hill garden, this mowed habitat, still seems is extremely high, as you can see in that map on the far right. And just to give you a look at what these two habitats look like, you see the native sandhill on the left, which is characterized by these like iconic species, the turkey oak, scrub oak, palmetto, wiregrass. You see a lot of diversity in the vegetation there. And then the ruderal habitat on the right, hill garden, is primarily Bahia grass, this non-native species of grass, with other non-native grasses and shrubs mixed in. And so these restoration efforts that have been going on Red Hill motivated us to ask the question of how these gopher tortoises are using the space on Red Hill. And so we broke that overarching question into two questions. First, do female tortoises use seasonal activity areas? And then next, do those tortoises exhibit fidelity to those areas? And then that can be broken down into a couple of other questions. Does body size affect the degree of fidelity from one year to the next? And then finally, does that degree of fidelity change over time? And so our field methods were pretty straightforward. There were 36 sexually mature female tortoises that were tagged in 2014 or 2015. And they were tracked for the last 6 years weekly. When a tortoise was found, their burrow number was recorded. And if it was a new burrow, that burrow was assigned a unique number and staked. And then the behavior of the tortoise was also recorded. So whether they were in their burrow or away from their burrow, foraging, nesting, etc. And again, this is 6 years of telemetry data. Next, I had to define seasons and activity areas. And I had the unique opportunity to use data that was specific to the population of tortoises on Red Hill. And so I extracted foraging observations, and I did a lot of calculations, but essentially I was trying to find the average distance away from the burrow that a tortoise could be found. And that magic number in a variety of ways came to be 49 meters away from the burrow. And so for daily activity areas, I created a 49-meter buffer around every occupied burrow by every tortoise. I then dissolved those daily activity areas into one polygon for each tortoise and each season. And that was defined as the seasonal activity area. And a year was broken into 3 seasons: nesting, summer, and winter. And this was relevant to gopher tortoise biology here in South Central Florida. And so then the next step to address the idea of fidelity, I had to calculate spatial overlap. And this was done in at three different temporal scales. And so the first being interseasonal overlap. And so this is talking about between seasons within 1 year. And this is going to tell us whether tortoises are using distinct areas seasonally. And so if you look in the bottom left corner on that map, you'll see a winter seasonal activity area overlaid with nesting, and then again overlaid with summer. And so those are the 3 seasonal activity areas within 1 year. And next you'll see the area of overlap that was used in the calculation. And so this is for 1 tortoise and 1 year. But those calculations were done for every single tortoise, 36 tortoises, and all 6 years. The next temporal scale was seasonal, and this was calculated in 2 separate ways as well. And so I calculated seasonal overlap between consecutive years. And so what this tells us is how the degree of fidelity from 1 year to the next. And so in the middle map, you'll see winter 2016 overlaid with 2017, 2017, 2018, 2018, 2019, etc. And again, so this is 1 tortoise, 1 season, but those calculations were done for every tortoise and every season. And then finally, I calculated seasonal overlap between all pairwise years. And so in this map, you'll see 2016 stays, but the rest of the years are overlaid with 2016. And so the results, well, just to remind you of my question, the first question was whether or not female tortoises are using distinct seasonal activity areas. And so the prediction was that they would. Turtles and tortoises have been known to use seasonal areas, and so I expected that Red Hill tortoises would follow suit. If we saw 0% interseasonal overlap, that would mean that from one season to the next, they were using 0% of the same area. And so that would mean that they're using distinct areas. Whereas 100% overlap would show that they're using the exact same burrow. And so I put 50% as an arbitrary number, but saying that less than 50% overlap would show that these tortoises are using completely distinct areas seasonally. And that's not what we found. We found that in every pairwise seasonal overlap calculation, there was greater than 60% spatial overlap. So they were not using completely distinct seasonal activity areas. And this doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't using different burrows, but that area of overlap around the burrow was 60% from one season to the next on average. The next question was whether they're exhibiting fidelity to these seasonal activity areas. And again, the prediction was that they would. I also expected that there would be less overlap between all pairwise years than overlap between consecutive. And again, if we saw greater than 50% seasonal overlap, that would suggest that they are showing fidelity to these areas of activity. And so we did see greater than 50% mean overlap in every season from one year to the next. The degree of overlap was similar in every season, although nesting had slightly less. And so they are definitely showing some degree of fidelity from one year to the next to these seasonal areas. The next calculation was seasonal overlap between all pairwise years. And again, percent overlap was nearly 50%. However, this was a little bit, about 10% less than the overlap between consecutive years, but we did see a similar pattern where nesting season had a slightly lower percentage of overlap. And so this was also expected because any animal is more likely to use the same area the following year than they are 2 or even 5 years down the road. The third question was whether body size affected the degree of overlap. And so the prediction was that larger tortoises would show higher degrees of seasonal overlap from one year to the next. And this was potentially due to a larger tortoise, or presumably older, just being more settled. Also within a tortoise population, there's female to female interactions. And so maybe these larger tortoises are winning those interactions and showing fidelity to these areas at a higher percentage. And so we did see that body size had an effect on mean percent overlap, but it didn't strongly explain the variance. The body size was, it had a significant effect in the nesting season, marginally significant. And so we can say that larger females did show higher degrees of fidelity to these seasonal activity areas. I wanted to test that further. My data was non-independent and repeated measures. And so I was using linear mixed effect models to test whether season and body size had an effect on the mean percent overlap. And I found that body size, or in this case, I used plastron length as the metric. So that bottom part of their shell, we measure the length, which is plastron length. And body size did significantly affect the mean percent overlap from one year to the next. And then season had a marginally significant effect when we measured seasonal overlap from one year to the next, and a significant effect when we measured between all pairwise years. And this was due to the fact that there was significantly lower mean percent overlap in nesting season than summer and winter, based on the post hoc Tukey test. And then the final question, does the degree of fidelity change over time? And so we expected that it would decline over time, suggesting that they are moving into new habitat or just expanding their range. And this is a little bit to look at, but if you focus along the x-axis, that bottom axis, you'll see that 2015 is paired with all other years. And so we were using 2015 almost as the home base activity area to see how the overlap changed over time. And again, we knew that plastron length was affecting the mean percent overlap. So I split the tortoises into 3 different groups based on plastron length. You can see the PL there. And if you focus on the top graph, you can see that in every season, percent overlap does show a slow decline and then plateaus. And so it would suggest that smaller individuals are showing less overlap over time. And I wish I had more time to explore this, but in the future, further exploration of individual habitat use will show us whether they're expanding their ranges into this new habitat or not. But that's going to, there needs to be exploration of just individual habitat use as opposed to just seasonal activity area overlap calculations. And so the conclusions, do female tortoises use seasonal activity areas? The data suggested that they weren't using completely distinct seasonal areas. There was greater than 60% overlap interseasonally. And again, I mentioned this, but that doesn't mean that they're not using different burrows. And so in the future, maybe we can look at inter-burrow use. So how are they moving between these burrows seasonally? And are they exhibiting fidelity to these seasonal areas in subsequent years? There was greater than 50% overlap from one year to the next, and nearly 50 between all pairwise years. And so from one year to the next, they're using 50% of that, the previous year's area, which is pretty high. And using 6 years of data and still getting an average of 50%, nearly 50% between all pairwise years is pretty amazing how these tortoises are exhibiting fidelity to the seasonal area, even 5 years down the road. Does body size affect the degree of fidelity? So larger individuals were showing higher degrees of overlap. And again, using habitat type or inter-burrow use might give us a little more information on what's affecting this, whether it's social interactions or these individuals are just settled in. They like hill garden better than sandhill. And then finally, does the degree of fidelity change over time? So it hasn't drastically changed. However, it does look like smaller individuals are showing less overlap over time. And so that there's definitely need for further exploration there as far as where these smaller individuals are moving to, and if they are expanding into that restored area. And so the implications for all of this, the larger females are showing higher degrees of fidelity. Again, this may be due to the fact that they're stuck in their ways. They're less likely to abandon this unsuitable habitat or move into restored habitat. If you remember from the beginning, the disadvantages of having this strong drive to return to this familiar site. And so it's important to talk about body size because these larger females are more fecund and potentially laying more eggs. And so if they're less likely to move into this restored habitat, you may see a slower colonization. And then social interactions between female and female tortoise on Red Hill. This weaker site fidelity exhibited by the smaller females may be a result of just losing the battles for a burrow between a larger female. And with that, I would like to thank all of the research assistants and the many, many interns that have cycled through the herpetology lab and helped out with radio tracking. I'd also like to thank the GIS lab, Greg Saunier and Jessica Judson that helped out with data analysis. And then finally, I'd like to call out specifically Amanda West and Alonzo, who were in the lab during my time. And then again, Disney Conservation Fund for funding my time here at Archbold. And with that, I will take questions. Here are some of my herp and invertebrate pictures that were taken out in the scrub this year on Red Hill.
Nice job, Chelsea. Thanks. I'm giving you a hand. I'm not seeing any questions pop up yet in chat. One thing people might be wondering is I guess why did we focus on the female tortoises with these particular questions, or would it be interesting to look at what the males are doing too?
That's a good question. A lot of spatial ecology, a lot of like studies of spatial ecology focus on females because they do carry the eggs. So where they're using the space and where they're nesting is going to directly affect the survival of their offspring. It would be interesting to also look at male ecology, spatial ecology. But that is why we study the females.
Okay, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A. At some point through the talk, someone was asking for clarification on what are pairwise years and what you meant by that.
Okay. So pairwise years, a pair would be how overlap was calculated. So if I was calculating overlap between 2016 and 2017, that would be the pair. When I said all pairwise years, there were a lot of calculations. So between 2015, 2016, 2015, 2017, 2015, 2018. So any combination, any pair of years was calculated. I hope that answers
yeah. Hillary is asking a question. Maybe I missed it, but were larger females using larger territories? And so the change in fidelity for smaller individuals really just means an increase in territory size.
That's
so
a good question.
Yeah, how territory size may have played into these calculations and findings.
Yeah, that's a good question. So you didn't miss it. I didn't include the actual size of the area that they were using. We do have that data. And nesting season, on average, all of the tortoises were using more space than in winter and summer. I did not test body size as an effect of seasonal activity area. But that's definitely something that can be done. We have those data. And so that's a very good point though. So we may see higher overlap when an area is smaller, if that makes sense. So if a nesting season, for example, an animal is using this huge space, and then the next season they use a very small space, that area of overlap is going to be small. And so that's a really good point to include the actual area or account for it.
Yep. One last question I'm seeing here from Aaron. Are the tortoises using different habitat types during the different seasons or moving around within the same habitat type?
Another great question. Yeah, so that's the next step, including habitat type into this. It gets a little hairy when tortoises are using both. So most of the tortoises jump between sandhill and the ruderal habitat. So that would be really cool to see if that's.
Is that? Oh, I was going to say I'm not sure. I would say most of them, but there's definitely a proportion that do that, right? And yeah, it probably varies over time. So it's, yeah.
It would be interesting to see if that was a seasonal effect, though, for sure.
Yeah. I guess we could get into compositional analysis of home ranges next, just to add a layer. Okay. Let me see. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. Now's your chance to ask our leading tortoise movement expert questions. No? Okay. You're getting a lot of good feedback in the chat. So thanks everyone for coming. Oh, wait, I did have a taker. Okay. Stephen is asking, sorry if I missed it, but is hill garden unsuitable or less suitable habitat based on some measured biometric or demographic performance?
That's a trick question. So I can't say whether it's less suitable or more suitable. I can say that it's non-native. So hill garden is, it was cleared in the early 1900s and it was replanted with bahia grass, which is a non-native grass. So I can say that. We haven't looked at body condition. So whether or not the tortoises in Red Hill or in Hill Garden are reduced fitness or reduced body condition because of the non-native habitat. But I think that's
we have looked at clutch sizes.
Yeah, that's probably something that's also a question that's kind of being answered with the juvenile study that's ongoing, trying to see if the juveniles that are growing in Hill Garden are, well, just comparing growth rates between Sandhill and Ruderal. There are a lot of questions, but I think that's definitely on Betsy's mind to start answering those.
Yes. Stay tuned for more on that. Maybe trade-offs going on in different habitats between things like growth and survival. So we want to get all that before we start kind of saying this one's good, this one's bad. But and then Julie had a question about the burrows themselves. How deep was the deepest burrow, and how wide was the widest burrow that you've seen up there?
That is a really fun question. I was primarily scoping the juvie burrows, the juvenile burrows. And it's pretty wild how a tortoise this big can dig, 25 feet. We reached the end of the scope, which is 25 feet long, several burrows. The literature shows adult burrows being up to 40 feet long. And then
on Red Hill, they can go as deep as they want pretty much because the water table is way, way, way down, double that. So we don't know how deep some of those burrows are in Red Hill.
Yeah. So I'm answering, I guess, the question of length. Deep, they don't have a steep decline. They kind of stay they probably go down 1 or 2 feet and then stay parallel to the surface. But the widest burrow, this is also kind of interesting. The width of the burrows correlates with the carapace length, so the tortoise's length. And we've seen some huge burrows out there. These tortoises are massive.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think our biggest female is
like 365 millimeters.
Yeah,
is our largest female.
Yeah, a child could fit in her burrow, let's say. All right. That may be wrapping up. Great. Okay. Thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Chelsea. That was a great talk. And thanks again to all our viewers today. Join us again in 2 weeks for a special guest distinguished speaker seminar. Dr. Eileen McClellan of the U.S. Environmental Defense Fund presents The Watershed Approach, a hydrologist's view of the upper Mississippi River Basin. You can like us on Facebook or check out our Archbold website to find that and register for it, or subscribe to our Archbold newsletter. You'll find all of this under the News and Events tab of our website. Thank you, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. Bye, everybody.